Welcome to this deep dive into Jaime Hoerricks' article, Fossil Capital and the Profitable Apocalypse.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be exploring, why capitalism might not be the solution to the climate crisis.
That's a big one.
It is a big one.
Yeah.
And Hoerricks' article is really interesting
Yeah.
because it kind of blends these personal experiences,
Yeah.
historical analysis, and even some thought experiments,
Right.
all kind of woven together
Yeah.
to examine this, complex relationship
Mm.
between capitalism and climate change.
It's a fascinating approach.
Yeah.
And it really raises some thought-provoking questions. Like,
Yeah.
was the shift to fossil fuels truly inevitable?
Right.
Can renewable energy truly thrive under a system that's, primarily driven by profit?
Yeah, those are good questions.
Yeah.
So let's start with this concept of fossil capital,
Okay.
which is kind of at the heart of Hoerricks' argument.
Right.
Um,
This idea comes from the work of Andreas Malm. And he argues that the transition to fossil fuels wasn't just, like a natural progression of technology,
yeah.
but a calculated decision rooted in the pursuit of profit and control.
Calculated, that's a strong word.
It is.
What leads Mom to that conclusion?
Well, he points to the example of choosing steam power over water power during the Industrial Revolution.
Okay.
Steam, although more expensive, offered factory owners the ability to centralize their operations and exert more control over labor.
So it wasn't necessarily about efficiency or the lowest cost.
Yeah.
It was about who held the reins.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What does that tell us about how profit motives can shape technological choices?
I think it suggests that technological advancements aren't always adopted based on their inherent merit or even their benefit to society.
Right.
The steam engine example really demonstrates how powerful economic interest can steer us towards technologies that reinforce existing power structures and prioritize profit, even if it means overlooking more sustainable or efficient alternatives.
It makes you think about how many choices that we think of as inevitable are actually influenced by, those in power.
Exactly.
So Hoerricks goes beyond this historical analysis and brings in their personal experiences. And talk about living in an area where large-scale solar farms were being developed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, and initially there was this sense of optimism in the community.
Okay.
The solar farms were touted as a path to a greener future.
Makes sense.
Promising cleaner air and lower energy prices.
Solar farms, lower prices, clean air.
Yeah.
That sounds like a win-win, right?
It does.
What happened?
Well, the reality didn't quite match the hype.
Oh.
Instead of decreasing energy costs actually more than doubled for residents.
Wow.
And to make matters worse, the local utility company, SoCal Edison, successfully lobbied to reduce the rates at which they buy back solar energy from residents.
So people who had invested in these solar panels,
right,
thinking they were going to, sell that energy back to the grid, they were left with much higher expenses.
Yeah, unexpectedly high expenses.
Wow. That's quite a turnaround.
Yeah.
So instead of promoting clean energy, the system seemed to hinder it. How did people react to this?
There was a great deal of disappointment.
Yeah.
Especially among those who had, really bought into the promise of a more sustainable future.
Right.
It shook their faith in the idea that green capitalism could deliver on its promises.
Right.
But that wasn't the only issue.
Uh-oh.
The construction of these solar farms had some unintended consequences as well.
Unintended consequences.
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
The large-scale digging and soil disruption during construction led to the release of valley fever spores into the air.
Valley fever, that's a pretty serious respiratory illness.
It is.
Yeah.
And it impacted a significant portion of the community.
Wow. So it's kind of this reminder that even initiatives designed with good intentions can have these unforeseen consequences.
Yeah, especially when the focus remains on profit and control.
Right.
Rather than genuine, holistic sustainability.
That leads us to Hoerricks' thought experiment, the idea of a community-powered thorium reactor.
Right.
This thought experiment asks us to envision a community that has access to a thorium reactor.
Okay.
Capable of providing free electricity and heating.
Wow.
Essentially freeing them from reliance on the traditional fossil fuel-based grid.
Free clean energy.
Yeah.
That sounds like a utopian ideal.
Right.
What's the catch?
Well, Hoerricks proposes this scenario to highlight a central problem. This incredibly beneficial and technically feasible solution wouldn't work under our current capitalist system.
Why not? Seems like something everyone could get behind.
Well, there are several obstacles.
Okay.
The first being the existing power structure.
Okay.
The fossil fuel industry would fiercely resist any technology that threatens their dominance.
And they wield considerable political and economic power.
Makes sense.
Secondly, there would be significant regulatory hurdles to overcome.
Uh-huh.
Anything that disrupts the current energy infrastructure faces an uphill battle against, established regulations and bureaucratic processes.
Yeah.
But perhaps the most significant hurdle is the profit issue.
The profit issues, so even with something as universally beneficial as free, clean energy, the profit motive becomes the ultimate stumbling block.
Exactly.
Wow.
A community-owned thorium reactor generating free energy wouldn't generate profits for large corporations.
Right.
And in a system driven by the pursuit of profit above all else, that makes it a non-starter.
This raises some interesting questions about our current system.
It does.
It seems like we have the solutions, but the system itself is preventing their implementation.
Precise.
And this problem isn't just theoretical.
Right.
It's reflected in real-world examples, too.
Yeah.
Such as?
Well, Hoerricks points to a video from the YouTube channel, Second Thought, that delves deeper into this problem.
Perfect. Let's dive into that video next and see how it connects with everything we've discussed so far.
Sounds good.
So this Second Thought video, what does it have to say about the profitability of renewables?
The video argues that while the cost of producing renewable energy has been steadily decreasing, investment in these technologies isn't growing at the same rate.
That seems counterintuitive. If renewables are becoming cheaper, wouldn't investors be eager to jump on board? What's the reason for this discrepancy?
Yeah, that's a good question. The video highlights a crucial factor: profitability. While renewables are cheaper to produce, they don't generate the same high profit margins as fossil fuels, at least not for the major players in the energy sector.
So it's not about what's best for the planet or even what makes the most economic sense in the long run. It's about squeezing out the highest possible profits in the short term.
Yeah, that's a key insight, and the video uses examples like Shell and BlackRock, both companies that have made, these public commitments to sustainability and reaching net zero emissions. However, a closer look at their actions reveals a different story.
So it's a case of greenwashing, talking the talk without walking the walk. What are some of the specific actions that contradict their claims?
Right. For instance, the video points out that Shell links its renewable energy investments to these unrealistic profit expectations. They essentially say they'll invest in green energy only if it yields the same sky-high profits as their fossil fuel ventures.
So they're setting themselves up to fail from the start.
Yeah.
It's like saying you'll run a marathon, but only if you can teleport to the finish line.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And this ties directly back to Malm's argument about the historical shift to fossil fuels. It wasn't driven by a desire for efficiency or even cost-effectiveness. It was about consolidating control and maximizing profit, even if it meant adopting a more polluting and ultimately destructive energy source. And it appears that the same logic is at play today with renewables.
So we have these potential solutions: solar, wind, even Hoerricks' thorium reactor idea. But the system we operate under prevents them from being fully realized because they might not generate the same massive profits as the existing fossil fuel-based system.
Yeah, that's the crux of Hoerricks' argument. And this leads them to take what they call an anti-capitalist stance.
Okay.
They argue that the very foundation of our economic system, with its prioritization of profit above all else, is incompatible with the type of large-scale coordinated action needed to tackle climate change.
That's a significant claim.
Huh.
But before we get into the implications of that, it's important to clarify what Hoerricks means by anti-capitalist.
Right.
It's not about advocating for some rigid, predetermined economic model or embracing any specific ideology.
Right, exactly. Hoerricks is simply pointing to the inherent flaws in a system that elevates profit above everything else, including the well-being of the planet and its inhabitants. It's a call to critically examine the systems that govern our lives and ask ourselves, are they truly serving us? Are they capable of steering us toward a sustainable future?
So if capitalism as it currently operates isn't the answer, what are the alternatives? What does Hoerricks propose?
They introduced the concept of matristic civilizations, drawing on the work of archaeologist Marisha Gimbutas, who studied ancient societies that exhibited more egalitarian and cooperative structures, often centered around what she termed feminine principles.
Now, it's important to acknowledge that terms like feminine principles can be loaded and subject to misinterpretations. We're not talking about romanticizing the past or promoting essentialist views of gender.
I agree. What's crucial here is focusing on the underlying principles, rethinking how we organize society, and shifting our priorities towards values such as well-being, equity, and a deeper connection with nature. It's about challenging the dominance-based hierarchies that have led us to this point.
So what might a modern matristic society look like in practice? Are we talking about some idealized eco-utopia?
It's not about striving for an unattainable utopia, but rather recognizing the seeds of change that already exist. Hoerricks points to examples like eco-villages, cooperative business models, and environmental justice movements as embodiments of these principles. They represent a shift away from a purely individualistic framework towards a more collective and community-oriented approach.
Yes, a really compelling point.
Mm-hmm.
It's about nurturing those existing examples, finding what resonates with us, and figuring out how to apply these values in our own lives and communities.
Exactly. It's a question worth exploring.
It definitely is. But let's bring our focus back to climate change. Within the current system, what tangible changes are needed to effectively address this crisis?
That's the crucial question. While there are no simple answers, recognizing the systemic barriers created by capitalism is a crucial first step. This awareness allows us to move beyond simplistic solutions and begin considering more substantial system-level changes.
So are you saying individual actions like reducing our carbon footprint, while important, aren't enough on their own?
Exactly. Individual actions are a great starting point, but we also need to tackle the root of the problem. We need to challenge the power structures that perpetuate unsustainable practices. This means holding corporations accountable for their environmental impact, pushing for policies that prioritize sustainability over profit, and supporting movements that are working towards a more just and equitable society.
It sounds like a fundamental shift in mindset is required. We need to move beyond seeing ourselves solely as individual consumers and recognize our interconnectedness and collective responsibility for the health of the planet.
Precisely. We need to challenge the deeply ingrained narratives of scarcity and competition that drive our current system and embrace a vision of abundance and cooperation. This is undoubtedly a daunting task, but it's essential if we want to create a future where both humanity and the planet can thrive.
There's certainly a lot to unpack here, and this deep dive has given us plenty to consider. But before we wrap things up, let's take a moment to highlight the key takeaways from all these sources.
Absolutely. Let's summarize what we've learned. Yeah, so it seems like the biggest takeaway from all of this is that capitalism's focus on profit is creating these systemic barriers to addressing climate change.
Yeah, it really does almost feel like we're trapped in a system.
Right.
That is, pushing us towards a cliff, yet we're so fixated on maintaining the status quo that we can't even consider, changing course.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful analogy.
So where do we go from here? If capitalism as we know it isn't the solution, what are the alternatives? What systems or approaches could we explore to better address this crisis?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there's no single easy answer.
Right.
But I think the sources we've discussed today offer some potential avenues for exploration, at least.
Such as?
Well, we've talked about these community-based initiatives, cooperative business models, and movements that center equity and sustainability.
Yeah?
These are all examples of alternatives that are already working to create change within the existing system.
So rather than trying to, completely dismantle the current system, we could focus on supporting and amplifying these existing efforts that are already demonstrating a different way of doing things.
Exactly. It's about fostering a shift in these power dynamics, gradually moving away from a system that prioritizes profit above all else to one that values the well-being of both people and the planet.
This sounds like a monumental task.
It is, but it's also an invitation to kind of rethink our values and priorities. It requires us to move beyond this individualistic consumerist mindset and embrace a more collective, interconnected way of being.
Right.
It calls for us to engage in, these challenging conversations, question the status quo, and remain open to new ideas and ways of living.
It seems like a journey that we need to embark on together.
Absolutely. And remember, the future isn't set in stone. We have the agency to shape it.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive. I hope this has, sparked some critical thinking and maybe even ignited a sense of hope. We've talked a lot about the problems, but remember, we have the power to create change. It starts with understanding the challenges we face.
And it continues with exploration. Check out the source material we've discussed today. Dive deeper into these concepts of fossil capital and matristic civilizations, and just keep asking those tough questions.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future.